Well, good morning, everyone. We knew that yesterday would be a historic day. We didn't really know how historic. Tied for the longest World Series game in history, but we outlasted the ball game. So at 2:30 in the morning, tired and bedraggled, we nonetheless took our final stand for students, for parents, and for teachers. We gather this morning, as always, on Treaty 6 territory. I want to acknowledge the people who built this land, the Indigenous people, the Métis people, and all those who come to make their home here. All those who come to make their home here because this place believes in success for everyone. This place believes in the dignity of everyone. This place believes in the human rights of everyone. Except our government doesn't. Our government doesn't believe in any of those things, sadly. Yesterday, this government did something we have never seen before. They trampled over the rights of workers and their unions. They did something we've seen a lot from them. They refused to solve a problem of their own making. Instead, they went straight to the nuclear option in what is the most cowardly act I have ever seen from any government. I want to be clear about a couple of things. Number one, students need to be in school. Teachers want to be teaching. Parents want their kids in school. But kids should have been in school the last 4 weeks. This strike was entirely of the UCP's own making. And as I said yesterday, when a government screws up this badly, there are only two options. They don't know what they're doing, or they did it on purpose. It's either incompetence or malice. And I'll give Premier Smith some credit. She got the double play. Malice and incompetence. What we didn't get is governance. What we didn't get was leadership. And every single Albertan deserves to be angry today. Every single Albertan. Because we didn't solve any problems. But we also showed that this government is willing to trample on anybody's human rights. I knew Peter Naheed. The Premier knew Peter Naheed. We took a class with Peter Naheed. In her press conference yesterday, she dared to invoke Peter Naheed. I will tell you right now that Peter Naheed would be spinning in his grave if he knew what she was doing in his name. The Premier is a coward. Not only did she refuse to negotiate with teachers, not only did she refuse to end this weeks ago using the powers she already had, she didn't even show up for the debate. The first Premier in Alberta history to say, I am knowingly passing a law which is unconstitutional. And I'm doing it on purpose because I don't care about your rights. And she didn't even show up. She couldn't be bothered to delay her Saudi Arabian junket. Maybe she needs to learn more about authoritarianism. She's a pretty good study. She couldn't even be bothered to delay her Saudi Arabian junket by a few hours to at least stand up in the legislature and at least explain to Albertans why she doesn't believe their human rights matter. She is a coward, and her government members are also cowards. This is language I don't normally use. I'm a pretty even-keeled guy. But we are outraged. We're outraged at this trampling of democracy, and we're particularly outraged because it doesn't solve any problems. And I want to be very clear, and my colleagues will get into this a little bit more, but I want to be very clear. The government had so many off-ramps. If they had announced this classroom size and complexity task force 2 years ago, we wouldn't be here. If in the spring, when the teachers overwhelmingly rejected this deal, if they had gotten to work and come up with a better deal, we wouldn't be here. Instead, they took the summer off, and in the fall, insultingly and on purpose as a provocation, they went back to the teachers with the same deal they'd already overwhelmingly rejected, with a free COVID shot thrown in. A shot that 90% of Canadians get for free anyway. What did they think was going to happen? Other than provoking and radicalizing the teachers to another no vote. Of course it was going to happen. We all knew it was going to happen. When the teachers started their strike, the province had all kinds of options. They could have called a dispute interest board and paused the strike for 30 days while they made a deal. They could have called a public emergency tribunal. They could have used powers under the Labour Relations Code to force binding arbitration. Even if they insisted on legislation, they could have called us back early. They waited because they thought that the teachers would lose support. They waited because they thought parents would get angry. And then, even then, they could have placed this legislation without the notwithstanding clause and let the courts decide months and years from now. And Rakhi will say much more about that. But they chose not to do that because they wanted to fight. They wanted people to think they were strong. That is the coward's way. Feign strength when you have nothing to back it up with. And that is precisely what this government has done. They think this ended at 2:30 in the morning last night. They think parents are going to be too busy today looking for their kids' runners and gym strips. Do we still say gym strips?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we do. Oh, well done. Yeah.
It's a Calgary thing, maybe. Looking for their kids' runners and gym strips, getting costumes ready for Halloween on Friday, sighing a sigh of relief that the kids are finally out from under them. They think this is over. It is not over. Because last night was the beginning of the end for this government. Last night was Albertans waking up to who this government really is. Last night was the veil dropping and the big, strong, tough Premier showing what a coward she truly is. And last night, I sat there the whole night and I looked at the 44 people across the way. It looked like an undertaker's convention. By the way, I used that line this morning, and my friend Craig Snodgrass, the newly re-elected mayor of High River, who is an undertaker, told me that undertaker conventions are actually super fun. I will take him at his word. There were a lot of people questioning their life choices in the smallest majority government there's ever been in Alberta. This Premier, by abandoning her caucus to twist in the wind on their own by not being a leader for them, has lost the confidence of her own caucus. And beyond that, she's lost the confidence of every single Albertan. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I want to say one other thing. When Alberta's New Democrats become the government of Alberta, inshallah, God willing, as I always say, we will never, ever use the notwithstanding clause. And one of our first acts as government will be to introduce legislation restricting the use of that clause for all future Alberta governments. Because we believe in human rights for everyone. We believe in freedom for everyone, not just when it's convenient. I'm going to turn it over to Shadow Minister of Education, Amanda Chapman.
Thank you, Naheed. Yesterday was an extremely dangerous precedent that was set by the UCP. And I want to be clear that what was done yesterday enforces a contract that was already rejected by 90% of teachers. A contract that fails to address the worsening classroom conditions, which is what got us here in the first place. Not only that, it imposes punitive fines on teachers and their unions for non-compliance, and most egregiously invokes the notwithstanding clause against workers. This action is egregious, it is reckless, and it is entirely unnecessary, and Alberta's New Democrats unequivocally condemn the actions of this government. What happens is that it puts teachers and students right back into the same conditions before this strike began, with not a single change. Nothing to make these classrooms better, nothing to address the concerns that parents, teachers, and students have raised over the last few weeks. So on our part, we will continue to stand up for teachers, for students, and for our public education system. And I'm happy to now turn it over to our Deputy Leader, Rakhi Pancholi.
Thanks, Amanda. So let's be clear. The notwithstanding clause has only one purpose. It's a blunt instrument from government to intentionally and unreasonably override the rights and freedoms of Albertans. The UCP didn't have to take this route. They had options that didn't involve legislation or the notwithstanding clause, but they wanted to avoid accountability. They wanted to ram through the legislation quickly, abuse their power as a majority government, and tell Albertans, all Albertans, that their rights are less important than the UCP's political agenda. By invoking the notwithstanding clause, the government knows that they cannot justify their legislation. They know it's unconstitutional. They know it violates Albertans' rights, and they did it anyways. That should alarm every single one of us. Now, in addition to my background as a lawyer, I also happen to be, like thousands and thousands of Albertans, a parent. And I, like every other parent I know, want our kids back in the classroom. But the right way to end this strike would have been to address the conditions that got us here in the first place. Ballooning class sizes and chronic underfunding from the UCP, that's what got us here. The right way to end this strike would be in a way that respects teachers, that respects parents and students, respects the rule of law, and respects our democratic institutions. But that is not what the UCP chose to do. I will now turn things over to our House Leader, Christina Gray, to talk further about some of the undemocratic tactics the UCP government used to pass this bill.
Thank you very much, Rakhi. As Rakhi mentioned, as I think all the speakers have mentioned, this government had multiple options in order to end this strike. They could have negotiated a fair deal, they could have issued ministerial orders, they could have used things that they have in the Labor Relations Code, and instead they chose this cowardly route. I want Albertans to know that Alberta's New Democrats fought back with all of the tools that we had, and that is why Bill 2 debate went well past midnight. We know that this government has a majority. This government will ultimately pass the bills that it wants, but it is the democratic right of all Albertans to see, to understand, to participate by contacting their elected representative, to have the opportunity to speak out, to have that opportunity to review and understand. And passing a piece of legislation in one single day was unprecedented. And to do so in order to use unprecedented clauses that remove rights, human rights, from Albertans is absolutely shameful. So when we heard that the government had intended to ram this through in a single night by looking at the order paper and seeing all the powers they had given themselves, we did what we could as the official opposition to grind the gears down to a halt. We forced a division on every vote. For anyone watching, that was all those 15-minute breaks. When you maybe wondered, what do politicians do all day? Those breaks were us slowing down the passage of this bill to make moving it through the legislature as painful as possible. We had also planned to introduce important emergency debates when we were working through the routine. And normally, those emergency debates would have been held before Bill 2 debate or any of that. But the government used a mechanism that in my research and looking through all of the legislative records has never been used before. So they used an unprecedented standing order called number 27 to then do an unprecedented thing of doing all stages in a single day to implement an unprecedented use of the notwithstanding clause in Alberta. So we used all available options to us. Unfortunately, the government used time allocation. In the history of our legislature, the government in the last 6 years has used more than 50% of the time allocations, the closing of debate. So when you think about it, in the entire history of the legislature, 50% of that has happened in the last 6 years, in a shocking abuse of the democratic system, treating the legislature as an impediment to a political agenda rather than an important part of our democracy. The UCP absolutely abused their power, and despite our right to table motions, despite our right to talk about important issues, despite the fact that we have members who represent 50% of Alberta, most members did not get to say what they wanted to say, and I have so many members who didn't get to speak at all because the debate was limited to essentially 3 hours, and that was it. Absolutely ridiculous. From forcing workers back to invoking the notwithstanding clause to shutting down debate and silencing any opposition, the UCP's complete disregard for democracy has been made incredibly clear. This is not how a government acts for the people or for freedoms. Alberta's motto is strong and free. It is not, we remove your freedoms when we disagree. I'll turn it back to Naheed.
So where do we go from here? Certainly there will be people across the province taking action today. There'll be more rallies, there'll be more protests. It is very clear that we will not forget. And teachers across this province will be questioning their career choices. Teachers across this province will say, you know, I coached the football team for 20 years without pay. I don't need to do that anymore. Ultimately, who will suffer? Students, because of the cowardly acts of this government. When Ontario tried to use the notwithstanding clause, public pressure made them back down in 4 days. But that's because Premier Doug Ford, like him or hate him, has a conscience. That Premier Doug Ford is not a coward, and he actually listens to people. This government will not back down. They never have. They've never apologized. They've never taken responsibility for any of their mistakes. Their game is to blame and to shame and to take the coward's way out. But I'll ask for one thing today. Yesterday, not one member of the UCP caucus stood and spoke in support of this resolution. The only ones who supported it were the Minister of Finance who moved it and one small intervention from the Minister of Education. So let's talk about the Minister of Education for a moment. Yesterday he told us class sizes don't matter. He's failed so miserably in this job in so many ways. He's part of a government that engineered the largest teacher strike in history and the largest loss of learning for students since the pandemic, the second largest ever. He has not one accomplishment to his name. He's presided over an $8.6 billion promise to build more schools that did not end up with $1 in the budget for construction. He couldn't even convince his own caucus to pay for the promise that they made. We deserve so much better. And today, we're calling on Minister Dimitrios Nicolaitis to resign before he gets recalled.
Thank you, everyone. We'll take your questions now. We're going to start in the room, but if you have joined us on Zoom, all you have to do is raise your hand to get into the queue for a question. Starting with Sean Amato from City News.
Hi there. I'm sure you've seen the picture of Premier Smith in the airport lounge. A political scientist likened it
I wonder if
to...
she also has a doctor's note to fly business class.
A political scientist likened it to Don Getty on the golf course or Jason Kenney upstairs on the Sky Palace during COVID. Just wondering what you think about that.
The Premier's sense of entitlement is extraordinary. She's been to the Middle East so many times, second only to her trips to Mar-a-Lago. And what has she accomplished for it? Have we seen a single dollar of foreign direct investment from any of those Middle Eastern countries into Alberta? Does she understand that they are our competitors in the global energy markets and they set the prices that have ruined her own budget? I'm not even sure she gets that. Yet over and over and over she goes, flying off to Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But last night was particularly egregious. The Premier prides herself. She is tough. She is strong. Her entire brand is she stands up for Alberta. And what we learned yesterday as she cowered in a business class lounge at the Calgary airport is that she is scared. She's scared of dissent. She's scared of debate. She won't even back up her own team. And she is a coward.
There's talk about a general strike now in Alberta. I'm sure people can understand that anger, but that would also harm public services. So what does the NDP think about a talk of a general strike in Alberta?
We would never speak for other organizations, nor would we speak for workers and their unions in this province. They will make their own decision. What I can tell you very clearly is this is not over. We will see bigger and bigger rallies and protests. We will see more and more anger in the streets and on the floor of the chamber. It's not over. And if the Premier and her caucus thinks that at 2:30 in the morning they ended this, they've got another thing coming, because yesterday, as I said, was the beginning of the end of this UCP government.
Sarah Comedia from Global News.
Thank you for taking my question. What is your plan to remedy the strike?
Well, we did what we can do in opposition. We are the largest opposition in Alberta's history, but we're not the government. So we did what we could do in opposition, but I can tell you what we would have done in order to manage this so we never got here. We would have never stopped reporting on class sizes as the UCP did. We would never have stopped the school construction program. Under the NDP, we built or modernized over 200 schools. The UCP stopped that. By the time they restarted it, they've been in power for 6 years. They've done barely 60 schools. And there's not a single dollar allocated in the budget for the construction of any new schools beyond the ones that they had much earlier promised. So we would have built more schools. We would have sat down with the teachers to talk about issues of class size and complexity long before now. We wouldn't have radicalized that group by treating them with so much disrespect. And we would give them a fair deal on wages. Long ago, we would have secured labor peace, and we would not have lost 4 weeks of students being out of school because of our own hubris, anger, arrogance, and cowardice.
How much would this all cost, and where would you get the funding from?
Well, the funniest part of that question is, in fact, it probably wouldn't have cost a whole heck of a lot, because these are investments that we have to make anyway. So instead of the UCP saying they're going to invest $8.6 billion but not putting it in the budget, we actually would have budgeted what we said we were going to do. And these are all choices. This is a UCP government that wastes money right, left, and center. They've massively increased management levels in the bureaucracy. They've massively increased management in healthcare. They've doubled or tripled the amount of money that goes to administration in healthcare by taking it away from the front lines. They've signed sweetheart deals with UCP insiders for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. They wasted $1.4 billion on a pipeline that never got built. They wasted $100 million on medication that nobody wanted, needed, and never got used. They've wasted $300 million, maybe, we don't know because they won't tell us, on a botched privatization deal for labs. So don't tell me that this government is good with money. They're lousy with money. They waste money every day and they take it away from their priorities. I said it last night and I'll say it again. The education of our children should never, ever depend on the WTI price every morning.
We're going to go to Zoom now, and joining us first is Janet French from CBC. Go ahead, Janet.
Questions are for Amanda. So, excuse my preamble here. We've got Nicolaides saying, okay, we've got this complexity task force, we've got these 3,000 teachers who are going to come in, 1,500 EAs. We will use them to improve classroom conditions. But on the other hand, we've got Nate Horner saying, well, we don't have the revenue to have pupil-teacher ratios, and we can't give the HA what they want because oil prices are low. And they've got this policy on the books about keeping spending below the increase in inflation plus population growth. So how believable is it for the Minister of Education to say that he will take meaningful action to improve classroom conditions at this point?
It is completely unbelievable. What the minister is saying is not the truth. It is not the reality. When he talks about adding, for example, 1,500 EAs to a system that has over 2,000 in schools, we're not even adding one EA to a school. And I know that the minister had said yesterday, well, he didn't like my populist math, and that's okay. I didn't like the Premier's populist math when she calculated the number of students per teacher in the system. Really, I was just trying to make a point. But of course, we're not going to put one EA in every school. Different schools will have different needs. But the fact of the matter is that it is a drop in the bucket. It is not enough. There are schools that need to add 5 or 6 EAs to deal with the complexity in their classroom, minimum. Because you have to remember that every school has a dozen or more classrooms. And there are schools right now who have no EA support. They have no EA support available to them. And it's the same with teachers. This number, 3,000 teachers over 3 years, which was already the government's hiring rate, right? This was already what was signaled in Budget 2025. There was never a new offer to teachers. There was never an offer to increase beyond the government's plan. And do you think that teachers would have gone on strike if they thought that plan was going to be enough to manage the issues with classroom complexity? No, they absolutely would not have. They know that this number of teachers, when we're losing half the teachers who start this job, right, in their first 5 years, we are losing half of teachers from this profession. 3,000 new teachers, it's simply not enough.
Follow up, Janet?
Yeah, follow-up is for the leader. You talked a lot about this as the beginning of the end for the UCP, and people aren't going to stand for this. But there are also people who are cheering the Premier online. Yeah, you put the teachers in their place. Yeah, you got school back. There are people who are happy to see this move. So what makes you think that this particular suspension of rights translate, like other than outside of the unionized working population, what makes you think that an average Albertan A, understands what's happened, and B, cares?
We'll help them understand. And what makes me believe it is 36,000 people on the steps of the legislature last week. What makes me believe it is the people who sat in the gallery until 2:30 in the morning. Yeah, there's some online bots and trolls, and certainly the Premier has a few followers who will follow her wherever she goes, but I would even ask them to look into their hearts and ask themselves a very simple question. If you believe in freedom, if you believe in liberty, shouldn't that be freedom for everyone? If the Premier is willing to go after her enemies, who's next? And that is what I saw in the faces of her caucus as I stared at them all night, desperately questioning their life choices, wondering how they got into this position where they're being forced to vote against their own principles. And I think many, many Albertans will see that. We have received thousands and thousands and thousands of emails. I would say I can't count on one hand. I can't count on 3 fingers the number of emails that said, I love what the Premier is doing. Even those that said, kids got to get back in school, we got to let adults figure this out and not hurt the kids. Every one of them said, but the teachers are right. This morning, I heard on the radio a woman who was a Convoy supporter, and even she said, I think the teachers caused this, I think this is a big problem, but the teachers are right. You can't build a coalition on that, Premier. That's my free political advice of the day.
Thank you, Janet. Jack Farrell, the Canadian Press, is next. Go ahead, Jack.
Hey, I just wanted to follow up on Sean's question, and I'm just kind of hoping for like a yes or no answer here on whether the NDP would support
Have you
a
met
general
me?
strike.
Have you met me? A yes or no answer. On whether we would support a general strike, that's not ours to support. It's a decision that Labour will make, and it is a decision they will make based on what they think is important for workers in this province. And we would never tell workers that we know better than they do.
Jack.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm asking if you would support one, not if you'd organize one, which I think your answer kind of gets to there. Just like support, though.
We will support workers in standing up for their constitutional rights, and we support the rights of workers guaranteed under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Thank you, Jack. Matthew Black from the Edmonton Journal is on the line. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi there. Thomas Lukazik says he's got over 456,000 signatures for his Forever Canada petition. What do you make of that, and what message do you think it sends to the Premier?
The Premier is going to spin this one so hard if she ever shows up in front of a camera again. She's going to say Thomas Lukazik stoked the fires of separatism. She's going to say, how dare he do this? There's an internet term that I feel like I've been using a lot lately. It goes FAFO, and the Premier is in the FO stage. That means find out. It doesn't mean anything dirty. The first part is dirty. She's going to find out. She's the one who put forth this legislation, and I'll remind her that she did everything she could do to make sure Mr. Lukazik had to qualify under the old legislation that she herself said would be impossible for anyone to qualify under. And he did it. And that's no surprise to me. All summer we've been talking to Albertans. We've knocked on over 200,000 doors. We've had 10 community gatherings across this province that got nearly as many people as the Alberta Next panels without $1 million of government advertising behind it. We've talked to people at music festivals and dog parks and small town rodeos and community fairs. And Albertans have been so clear that this country is big and it's bruised and it's crowded and it's messy and it's not always right, but it's the best place on earth. Albertans are strong, powerful Canadians. So now the Premier's got a big choice ahead of her. Does she force a referendum that she knows she's going to lose? Does she do what the legislation allows her to do and have a debate in the legislature on whether Alberta should remain a part of Canada and avoid the referendum? Or does she do the right thing and say, I stoked the fires of separatism, I chased away tens of billions of dollars in investment from Alberta as a result, unemployment has increased by 3 points under my watch because of my pandering to the separatists who want to destroy this country. I was wrong, and I resign. She will never do that. She's never apologized. She's never apologized for anything. She will find a way to blame someone else. Maybe she'll find a way to blame Trudeau. In fact, I'm pretty sure she will. And she'll blame Thomas Lukazik, and she'll blame the 456,000 patriotic Canadians who signed that petition. One of these days, the Premier needs to take responsibility and blame the real culprit, which is herself.
Follow up, Matthew?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. We're going to go to, I believe, the Drayton Valley Free Press. Please tell us who you are and go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, we can't hear you. Are you there?
Go ahead, Free Press. Okay, it appears somebody has left the monitoring section of their recording. Unless there's another question in the room.
All right, and I'll say to our friends from the Drayton Valley Free Press, just call Kirk if you want to ask a question. We'd be happy to work with you.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're here.
we are.
You're here. Hooray!
I just realized now that we have free press.
But you're somebody else. Tell us who you are. Oh no, we've lost you again. This is so mysterious.
Hello.
Ah, there you are. Hi.
Yes. This is Medicine Hat Owl News.
Ah, hello.
Free press.
Okay.
I'm seeing threads online, social media, that are calling for a boycott of the UCP businesses. Wondering what you think about that.
Well, I haven't seen that myself, and certainly I don't know what a UCP business is. I wouldn't
Okay.
want to see.
Business that's owned or connected to, like, for instance, back in 2022, there was a boycott list for Jason Kenney. Just businesses that are associated with the UCP, like here in Medicine Hat, for instance. Justin Wright has some fryer trucks, and people are calling for a boycott on Reddit.
Oh, people have the choice to do what they can. I would hate it if entrepreneurs in this province were penalized because of their political beliefs. That's not right. But at the same time, even conversations like that are showing the UCP that people are really angry, that this isn't going away. And I encourage folks to call their MLAs. Call your MLA and say, hey, what were you thinking? It's hard for me as someone who maybe voted for you to support this kind of action. Let them know that they have options. That many, many parties, when their leaders treat them like this, treat them as expendable, that they don't have to stand for that. I can tell you right now that earlier this summer, the UCP stood up for the rights of Quebec to have a law that is the only law in the world, I believe, that bans Muslims, observant Sikhs, and observant Jewish people from having certain jobs. UCP stood up for that. So I got to tell you, if you belong to one of those minority communities, if you represent a constituency that has minority communities in it, ask yourself what in the world you're doing there and start packing your bags, because you're not winning the next election. And I really believe that citizens need to make their voices heard loudly and proudly and help the UCP understand that this is not over. And I think of Medicine Hat, right? I think of Medicine Hat in your recent municipal election, where the citizens of Medicine Hat voted overwhelmingly for a vision that is not a UCP vision in a place like Medicine Hat. So hey, there you go.
Is there a follow-up? Okay, Janet French, I see that your hand is up again. Do you have another question, Janet?
I have two more. So I just want to go back to the something Mr. Nenshi said about a promise to introduce an act to restrict use of the notwithstanding clause for future Alberta governments. Tell me more. What do you have in mind for that?
Well,
how would you restrict the use of that?
Well, I've had all of 12 hours to think about it, and most of those were in the legislative chamber. But I'm really intrigued by, and I know a fair bit about this because I'm kind of a Constitution nerd, and I've read Peter Lougheed's writings on it. Peter Lougheed himself suggested 3 criteria before the notwithstanding clause could ever be used. Those criteria were that the legislation must spell out why there is no other option, that it must require a supermajority of the legislature to pass, and that it must never be used preemptively. It can only be used in response to a court decision. I think those are very interesting criteria to start with. I believe that Premier Canoe in Manitoba has tabled legislation that has some similar and some different facets to it, but I think it's time to put guardrails on this, because clearly the guardrails that we've relied upon for 40 years, which are guardrails that are based on conscious ethics and morals, don't work when you have a government like Danielle Smith's.
So my follow-up to that is, why is it the province's job to put guardrails on a constitutional?
Because they're the ones who use them. They're the ones who use it. The federal government has never used the notwithstanding clause. No federal government has even ever contemplated the use of the notwithstanding clause. It's the provinces that use it. The reason it's in the Constitution is because Peter Lougheed negotiated it as a piece of provincial rights. We are likely, I think, don't quote me on this, but it's a question worth following up on. I believe we're the only constitutional democracy that has such a constitutional override in its charter. So given that, we have relied on the goodwill and thoughtfulness of politicians to not use this thing. And now we have a government that's willing to use it willy-nilly, and it's time to put some guardrails on it.
All right, everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. Mind how you go.
Thank you.